I heard once that a goal without a plan is just a wish. Well, artist, it's about planning, and everything comes down to that, really. You have to have an idea of what you want, but get involved and just start working, putting your ideas together, putting it on paper, seeing what happens. In this unit, we break things down, but from reverse. Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 2 of Section 2. I'm Christopher Epling. Thanks so much for taking the course. Today we're going to be continuing on with planning and process, but we're going to be thinking about things a little different. So far we've asked you to be forward thinking in your project. What I mean by that is we've asked you to create something in terms of a story, an idea, a concept you want to convey. We've asked you to think about that idea in terms of how to visualize it. We've asked you to also begin planning for the end result through storyboard. So we're going to continue that idea, but re-engineering it in a way. So instead of moving forward with you creating something out of nothing, we're going to look at something already created by other artists and we're going to break it down. By doing that, we can see maybe a glimpse into what an artist is thinking. What are they going through in terms of the process in their mind they think that will reach that end goal, which is the same process you're at right now. So thanks again for taking the course. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's unit. Okay, so we'll look at this first. Now, talk about easy to really break down. This is a book I illustrated. So all of the illustration work and graphic design work within the page of this book I can talk about pretty easy because I did it. Now, I didn't write this book. It was written by Melinda and Joey Richardson. But so when I'm following, though, the guidelines from the publisher, and we'll talk about this page in particular, it's pretty specific. I received pretty in-depth descriptions on how they would like to see each illustration laid out. This is a macaw, and the name of this bird in the story is Maxwell. Now, for this particular illustration, I don't have it in front of me, but I can remember just by looking at it too. I remember the layout was described to me as the bird with its wings out on a limb with flowers in the background, sunflowers, not a lot, just a few, to show that he's at the top of the tree. Also, in every page, they wanted me to insert a ladybug somewhere on that page. So when a child was to read this book, they would find these hidden ladybugs. And the layout for each page, as I said, was pretty much given to me by them. But breaking down the composition, in particular, this is what we call a spread in the publishing industry. They wanted to see this tree that had been cut down, the eagle sitting on it, and each arrangement of the birds was not described in particular, but they did tell me what birds they wanted to include, so it was my job to make that happen. Now, for your story, you're at an advantage because you are the one actually deciding what's going to happen. Either it's a standalone piece of art that has a narrative to it, something that we referenced Norman Rockwell, just one of the artists last unit. Very narrative-driven artist. You can look at his work and see an entire novel. If you don't believe me, just Google some of his paintings, and you'll be able to see. We're going to look first for those out there who are into the comic side of things, into comic art, cartooning. Look at a few examples from that medium and see exactly how this works. So a narrative within comics takes place within panels. That's the boxes. So within every box, there's a drawing. That drawing is what drives the narrative. Also within each panel, and we'll call the boxes panel from here on. Inside of each panel, you also find things like word balloons or different types of tools that an artist will use to show narrative and to drive the story along. So you'll see that a lot with comics. That's just a few of the tools that are used. Now with manga is a style of cartooning in comics. It's there's a lot of action. Usually the panels, as you can see here, are shaped in interesting ways. An artist will often use the shape of the panel to help drive the narrative. In this particular page of a manga, we have A lot of action going on. So you'll see even some of the exclamation points breaking the panel box and coming outside of the panel, which is perfectly fine. Comics aren't all about superheroes or funny, silly gags. Comics are being used now to describe a narrative that is very serious, autobiographical or biographical work. This particular image here is a pretty disturbing image, actually, because this is the cover of a book called My Friend Dahmer. You heard me correctly, that's the title. And the reason it's titled that is that the Derf Backderf, which is a funny name, Derf Backderf, the author and also the illustrator or cartoonist for this piece, went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, that has nothing to do with superheroes, but this autobiographical work deals with knowing Dahmer in high school, what he was like, and he put all this in a graphic novel. It's probably one of the most well-known comics or graphic novels that have broken the stigma or stereotype of comics being silly or stupid and just absurd. This is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This book is about the Nazi Holocaust in Poland. His father, Art's father, went through that, was in a concentration camp, survived, came to the United States, told Art about his experiences, and Art put that into a graphic novel called Mouse. Mouse won a Pulitzer Prize in literature. And you heard me correctly there too, a graphic novel that has won the Pulitzer Prize. Now, typically, though, we think of comics being superhero driven, fantasy laden, lots of extraordinary things happening, spectacular things happening, amazing things happening. A man gets bit by a spider and becomes radioactive and turns into the amazing, spectacular Spiderman. You'll need to take a particular notice in comics of the style. So this is a few examples of drawing eyes with manga or anime. Now the difference between anime and manga is real simple. Those of you that don't know, it's just, something you should probably know. Anime refers to animation. So anytime you say, I like to watch anime, that's appropriate. Manga deals with magazines, so print. Anytime you say I read manga, that's fine too. But you can't necessarily read an anime, and you don't watch a manga. Manga art has a lot of ties to Western art. There's a lot of different styles of art, but they do have similarities. So cross hatching is a big one. We'll go over that in the techniques unit. We also have styles of art driven narrative that have no words. Now, the truest form of sequential art, and this is really what this workshop is about, is telling a story or sharing a thought or an idea without many words. If you have to use words, that's okay. If you're designing your project around that, that's perfectly fine. But this is a great example by the cartoonist Robert Crumb about a narrative with no words. If you follow this from the top left down to the bottom right, you see that Robert Crumb has drawn the same landscape and how it changes over time. Those changes is the modernization of our current world. It's the Industrial Revolution. It goes into the early, probably I think 80s at the bottom. So the early 1800s to the 1980s. So you can see the span of time he covers. That's a long time. Time within art is subjective and it's relative, but you can give a person a sense of time by how you draw and how you structure those drawings. We return to manga a little bit here. You can see the style of manga. It's very sharp lines for chins. The eyes are usually very large. The hairstyles are usually very active and moving. And you compare that now to, this is a couple of panels out of the graphic novel Mouse, where we see that there's a lot of cross-hatching and dark lines. There's not a lot of active lines going on. The artist deals more with contrast of white and dark in this. He draws all of the Germans in this as cats and all of the Jewish population as mice. A lot of people don't understand that comics have contributed to modern narrative in a lot of ways, such as The Road to Perdition was made into a movie. My Friend Dahmer has been made into a movie released in 2017 this year. A lot of comics have produced a lot of narrative, a lot of joys for narrative. There's a few panels from The Road to Perdition. You see the style of art do have similarities to that of manga. There's a lot of action lines, so you see movement, such as down in the lower left panel, no, where the man screams no. But there's a lot of differences as well. So this is the art from the cover of the first comic of The Walking Dead, which is now a major sensation across the world. And you can see the style of art here has similarities to general cartooning. The features are not really sharp or bold, but they're more of just a cartoon aspect to them. Here's some of the tools I talked about cartoonists will use to drive narrative. So there's thought balloons, there's action marks, there's stars, there's word balloons, there's variation on panels, there's no panels, there's full page spreads. There's so many things that an artist can use. So you see the action from this particular layout and the composition of the actors moving inward. Sometimes artists will put the most important characters, the main characters, in the foreground, in the front, and supporting characters in the back and the rear. These things all matter a lot. We'll take a look here now at some more traditional illustration work in comparison to that of cartooning. Obviously, the biggest difference between illustration, which is for children's books or picture books, and that of cartooning, is that there's no panels. The panel is the page. But within that, we have to be more careful. And I want to make this really clear for a second, so let's return here. If I have only this much space to tell a story in, this is all the space that I have. I can't use anything else except this piece of paper. I'm going to have to be very, very conscious of what I place on here and where and how. So for instance, at the beginning of this page up top, I can't use very, very tiny, small panels so a person can't read it. So the size of the panels matter. If I only have this much space to tell a story in, I'm going to drive the story through the process of placing the most important aspects first. So introduction, and this is the themes of any story in writing, in literature and narrative. An introduction, you introduce your setting, your main characters. You move on to introduce a conflict, a problem, an antagonist, a protagonist into your problem, into your story. From there, you go into conflict resolution, so you have a compromise or a resolution of that problem. And then you have your climax, your ending, your closure, which is at the bottom. This much space. So a children's book, they have space as well to tell a story, but it's only on one page. Now they have to be very careful then on what they choose to depict. Within this illustration, you have a boy looking at I cannot think of the name of it. An otter, I guess, maybe, or seal. There we go, seal. You can see underneath the water, the break of the water line, so you see into that world too. You also see the boy setting. He has what I think is a toy boat with him. This tells a lot. This could drive narrative. This is the most important thing, though, of that particular scene. So, for instance, if you're reading this in a children's book type of consuming it as a children's book, you can imagine there's words at the bottom of the page, okay, and those, whatever that is, it may say that little boy walked from his home, past his neighbor, waved at his neighbor on his way down to the dock. He got to the dock and he set his boat in the water and he sat down and he admired how pretty the day was. He was looking around for his friend the seal, and then the seal shows up. Now, out of all of that I just said, that imaginary text that could be on this page, the most important part is that he saw the seal. The seal showed up. The artist didn't choose to draw the boy walking by his neighbor's home, or waving at his neighbor, or placing his boat into the water, or sitting back looking at how beautiful the day was. The artist chose to draw this particular scene because that was the most important. You have to use your space wisely, is my point. So we take a look at this illustration. This is watercolor. The cat is sitting in a toy boat reading a book. We see a lot of oceanic type of elements here with shells and sand and bottles and fish and a boat. So all of these elements are parts of that story. They're important parts of that story. The illustrator wouldn't have chose to draw those. Notice the composition too. The cat and the boat is in the foreground. The other elements are in the back, but those elements don't really do much to the story. but it adds to a sense of, like I said, that oceanic type of sense of feel. So let's take this and break it down then, composition wise. Okay, if we were to take this particular illustration and look and notice how the artist did what they did. So first we see that in the foreground, this area here up front towards us, I'll just draw these general shapes. Pretend that I'm storyboarding, okay? I'm going to storyboard this. Let's say that I want my boat to be here, okay? And I'm planning my page. I'm pretending I'm this artist. So here will be my boat. And this will be the stern and all. So, and then up from here will be the math. And we'll have our little cat sitting in the rear with his ears and his book. Okay. Now, this is composition. The boat is setting on this fabric here, on this little stand. It's probably maybe a dresser with something over it. There's a ladder coming up. So the artist, before the artist ever went to put watercolor on paper, more than likely, some artists don't have to do this, and it really comes with with drawing a lot. So if you're an artist that has really dedicated your entire life to drawing, then maybe you don't have to plan this way. But young artists, a lot of artists, I think, it benefit from planning their composition. So my storyboard, in which is one page, could look something like this. I have shells in the background. So this artist, I mean, I'm not going to bank anything on it, but I could almost guess that this artist may have drawn something similar to this before they worked on this final piece here. There's a good chance of it because planning is everything. And you'll notice with the artist's work that planning exists. Let's take a look at a couple more. Here we see a very whimsical illustration. Narrative here can be easily seen. There's a giant troll under a bridge. There's three goats moving across. So anybody who's children's stories fans understand what this is from. Notice how large the troll is, and the troll's in the foreground, right in the middle of the page. Takes up everything. Here we have another piece. This is something more whimsical too. We have a lot of birds, a lot of animals, a little girl sitting by a tree, and a little boy hugging a lion. This drives narrative in a sense that we see that these characters in their relation to those animals. So we have something as simple as this too, which really tells a story. It could be a lot of different stories that it's telling. The boy could be extremely strong. He could have a friend that's an orangutan. Maybe that's a stuffed animal. Who knows? But we want to know more by looking at it. Different mediums can add different emotions and feeling. When you look at a piece, you can pull stuff from it that's very bright. This I would imagine to be colored pencil with maybe ink. Illustration drives a story. The illustrations serve almost as a soundtrack to the narrative, to the story. They don't want to take over and become the main focus of a book or a story or anything, but they help add to it. Standalone pieces can be that way too, and they can add so much more. If you can find someone who can create a narrative through a standalone piece, they can say more than an illustrator can in 34 pages. In this particular illustration, we see that the artist probably used a digital format to create this, I'm guessing, or acrylic, maybe, I don't know, but there's a good chance this is a digital piece. But in this could be a standalone piece by itself. We don't need any words, more pages, or anything. And we can look at this and we can actually start to imagine what is that story. Here we have a giant octopus that's invading a town. I mean, there's so much to this too. This is drawn more in a comic sense, but there's a little bit of illustration influence here too. But just this image alone can tell us a lot, or ask a lot from us. What's happening? What's going on? We look at illustration and drawings and we ask questions, and that's the main point. And that's what we really want from you in this course, is to ask yourself questions. What's going on? Why are these two people standing outside of their house for a portrait, holding a rake? What does their expression show us? What do we think of? What is the neatness of the home behind them, where their clothes tell us about these characters? why does this little girl looking at hats, and why is this man helping her? Is she really happy, excited about all these different hats? These are things that whenever we create a piece, we want to ask ourselves, what is it that we want the audience, the viewer, to see? Many times, illustrators will go as far as to place certain things inside of a drawing that really don't really belong in the narrative or exist in the narrative, but they add them there because they want to enhance the story in a way. You can consider this particular illustration from the book Life of Pi, which is narrative driven completely. Um, you want to ask the question, how do these characters end up where they are? It really, really begs the question, what's going to happen? There's so many different aspects of composition as we looked at here earlier. Notice as we go through these and imagine in your mind what would the storyboard look like for each one of these examples. This one in particular is pretty frightening if you think about it. This child levitating, and the family looks scared, and the little brother's getting out of the room. So there's a lot going on, and if you don't ask questions when you look at something like this, it's just it just begs so many unanswered questions. And it can be simple too. It doesn't have to be something so extreme. You can imagine these two girls are friends or not friends. Are they enemies? Could they be enemies? Could they be totally different with one knitting and the other in a cheerleading outfit? Or what does this ask us? What are these kids doing exactly? Is a dog involved? They're on the ocean in a boat. Do they even know where they're going or why they're going where they're going? Illustration helps to drive narrative in this way, and we're back to this original piece we started with because it's something so important. So consider this as you're moving forward, and as we move forward, consider what's happening and why. Okay? So let's take, for example, breaking down this particular page now, this manga page. It's important to show different styles of art and the different methods of storyboarding. And that's really what we want to do. We want to show these different elements. So let's consider this for a second. Let's consider this page, and we'll think to ourselves, how exactly did the artist go about planning for this page? Now, planning for a comic is a lot different, of course, because, like we said, we have panels. The first decision that an artist has to make is what is going to be the shape of my piece. Is it going to be very long, very tall, going to be very wide, very thin in terms of its height? So you have to design and think about the shape of the page, the space you have. Now, this is a snapshot in this particular time period. Whatever happened in this comic is going to be here as a snapshot. So once you have the general shape of whatever it is you're creating, you have to start breaking down these panels. So this artist has one panel making up the introduction to this particular page or scene, which will go here. Another panel which goes here, like that. Then we have a large panel at the bottom. We're going to deconstruct this page and think about it in terms of what the artist tried to do, or did do. There's two panels here. So this is the general layout of the panels for this particular manga. And an artist may go ahead then inside of these panels and start to add elements. So we'll do stick figures, that's all. So we have this figure here facing this figure. We'll do stick figures for our storyboards because that helps us. Then we have just the face, just the head here of this figure bending over. And we'll add the word balloon that happens here. And there's a word balloon here. So you want to be sure and add those word balloons in. This is very basic stuff. You're not looking to be detailed here. You're looking to be very general. Just adding in the shapes. Where will the figures be in relation to one another? Okay. What's going to be happening inside of each panel? And you start to lay out the storyboard. Like I said, don't try to be detailed in this phase. This phase is just simply going to be for you to understand what's happening and then build upon that. You may add some a little more detail in some panels than others, but for the most part, this is only to show what's going to be happening in the page. That's it. And you can see from what I've done already that I've broken this down, probably not exact what the artist has done, but it's relatively close. Okay. The purpose of this, though, is to deconstruct what the artist did to see why they did it. Now, in this particular page, the daughter learns something, which is this character, the one that's in the large panel. We don't know what she learns because this is just a cutout of one page of a book. But in the word balloons, the mother tells her, apologizes for something, and then she asks if she wants to go home. That's what happens in this page, our narrative. So if the script, your story, is laying over here, and you're reading your story, just as it appears, words on a page, you may say to yourself, in this portion of this story here, these few lines, what happens in this portion of the story is going to be depicted in panels. And once you decide that, you take that excerpt out, okay, and you have now just the piece of that story here. You don't have the whole story, just the piece. This piece is going to be this page. Then you have to break this down and think of it in terms of layout. And that's how cartooning and illustration works. We have another example here. Now, this is an example that is from an artist that we looked at in Unit 1. And we're going to try to break this down now. And we're going to try to look at this from the standpoint of what the artist might have been thinking and move from there. Now, in this particular design, we see that the artist has put a man standing on a water hose. The water hose is forming steps. The man is walking up those steps, and he is watering the shrubs. So the artist, when planning for this, may have gone as far as to design it in terms of maybe a sketch. And this is digital, of course, so we're going to play around here and see what happens. So here we have a few lines here. Let's go ahead and make our brush a little larger. So we have just a little bit larger brush. Once we do that, we're going to start to work on this design. So we're going to start by just getting rid of what we just did. Okay, now let's start to play around with the composition. So this artist obviously has these perspective lines that are moving down the page. So they may have went ahead and put those in first. These lines that you see showing perspective, showing that the shrub is getting taller towards the end, closer to you. Now, this isn't exact, but you can see what I'm doing. Now, he or she may have placed the water hose here, so the spout is here. They played around with the composition of where they placed this in the lower left-hand corner. The reason they did that is that the line coming from this is going to go up. We want to show height here, so that adds to our perspective. Okay, the hose comes up and into the hand of the man, and then we have this man standing on top here, holding the hose. So the artist may have planned this in different ways. They may have put the perspective lines going in different angles. They may have taken this and looked at it completely backwards, so that they see what would it look like coming from this angle, this perspective here. And they could have decided to themselves, well, I like this, but maybe I see a more sense of height going in the opposite perspective lines. Breaking down what an artist chooses to do is very important. And that's what you're being asked to do now, but with your own work. You're being asked to think about these things. You're being asked to take your narrative that you want to tell, play with it, move it around, shape it, until you get it to where you want it. And it's only then that we can begin to create our final piece of art. whether that's a series of sequential pieces or a standalone piece. Art is narrative, whether you like it or not, or it means to be. It tells a story, and often different stories to different people. Reverse engineering. It's pretty neat. Looking at an artist's work and thinking, what the process did they take to get to where they are at having this design or this drawing, this graphic representation of their idea, what narrative were they wanting to get across to the viewer. It's really interesting. You should try it sometime. In fact, that's part of this unit's assignment. Find an artist's work you enjoy, look at it, break it down, and try to reverse engineer it, similar to how we did today. Think about what went through their minds while they created that piece. Think about what maybe the storyboard would look like, or the planning study would look like of a finished standalone piece. Try to consider for yourself, would you have made those same decisions? And if so, can you understand a little bit of as to why they did? Reverse engineering works in a lot of ways, and for planning a process for your piece, it's important. So thanks again for taking the course. I'm Christopher Epling. Go ahead and get ready to turn in that assignment for this particular unit. And we'll see you in Unit 3 of Section 2. Thanks a lot.